You now tuned in to the Gumptown Podcast. I'm your boy Doug B. We ain't got nothing to talk about, but we got something to talk about. Let's go. Good people. Welcome back to the Gumptown Podcast, episode 138. I'm Doug B. If you tuned in to this podcast, thank you for your time and your attention. I really appreciate you giving this podcast a shot. Today's guest is the founder and owner of RIZN LLC, as well as the host of the Evolution Podcast. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure we'll all be inspired by his story. Let's chop it up with Emmanuel Igweh. Emmanuel, how's it going, man?
Man, it's absolutely fantastic to be a guest on the Gumptown Podcast, man. Thanks again for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time to chop it up.
Absolutely. I wanted to let the listeners know I'm actually pretty excited for this pod because we initially had spoke. You were a guest on the Evolution Podcast, and I love what you're doing for Gumptown and pretty much the origin story. So I'm pretty excited for what we're gonna dive into today.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, man. Glad to have you here. And of course, we're here to talk about all the great things you have going on with the Evolution Podcast, as well as RIZN Results. But before we talk about those brands, let's talk about the man behind the brand. Born and raised in Nigeria, what was your upbringing like?
Oh man, yeah. Oh, you put me on the spot there. What's my upbringing like? Oh man, it was like fire and brimstone. So the best way to put my upbringing is to kind of summarize it of hot and cold. So if you I don't know if you guys got a couple minutes, I might just share a little bit of story about, my upbringing and pretty much what I've been up to. So originally, as you said, I was born and raised in Nigeria. My father was my role model, but also was the person I was afraid of the most. Right? You know what I mean by that?
Yes, sir. You respected your dad.
Not even just respect. It was not even. I think the respect is there, but I feared disappointing him.
Gotcha.
Right? So to kind of bring into perspective. So growing up, right, I'm the youngest of five. So I have three sisters, one's late, may her soul rest in peace, and I have an elder brother. So my father always used to have this. If he heard I had a podcast, man, he probably would be like rolling up in his grave because I'm gonna tell you why. So my growing up, my brother wanted to be a musician. He wanted to be a rapper, and when I mean he had bars, but I remember he went to my father for support and he just said, "Hey, I wanted to buy some music equipment." And my father gave him when I mean, dude, it was a tongue lash. It's not something you want to hear from a father. And it was basically, he set the rules that none of his sons were allowed to do anything in art, no music. You're not even allowed to draw. So I remember my brother would tell me whenever I drew, he would say, hide it. Right. So I used to be, like arts. He's like, hide it. So we were only taught that you had to be in the sciences. Like if I had all A's and I had a B, it'd be like, okay, why'd you get a B? Or if I had all A's and no B's, it'd be like, well, you cheated. Right. So it was never any winning or losing, but it was kind of like he basically said the fear of disappointment was more of just growing up. I didn't think the standard was high. And I didn't think I just was afraid of disappointing him. So that led me into all the ventures that I have today. And honestly, I'm kind of grateful for it.
Wow, that's powerful, Emmanuel. I thank you for sharing your story, your upbringing, and dad, and just in terms of what he wanted for you all. And hats off to you for being willing to step in what you've stepped into now. I mean, despite how you grew up and being told not to be in the arts, just to be just your dad had a plan in mind for where he thought you all should go. And our parents, they do the best that they can with what they have. They have information that they were granted with, so they typically pass it down to us. So I don't ever say our parents did a bad job. They did the best they could, and I'm sure your dad did the best he could, the best he knew how.
Absolutely. No, I still say today to this day, because a lot of people would listen to that and they would say, "Oh man, your dad was terrible or was mean." But I said, no, he was the dad. I mean, because a lot of people listen, most people haven't had the privilege to go to Nigeria or grow to the town I grew up in, which is was a state called Kaduna in the northern side of the country. But growing up there, especially when you're growing up in the rural areas where it's not necessarily the nicest to grow up in, you don't want to be out after 7, 8 p.m. Not saying all of Nigeria is bad, but just specific regions, you have to be careful. My father basically set the precedence for saying, basically, he was the dad that I needed for the environment that I was in.
Hmm. Wow. That's powerful, man. And it's all about perspective. And it's great that you have that perspective. And to your point, there's that environment you were in, and your dad had to be who he was just to make sure you came up in that environment. You were safe. You had the game you need to make your way through that area of Nigeria that you all grew up in. So when exactly did you make your way over to the States?
Man, it's a do you want the 2013 was when I came up here. And what's interesting, because I know I like to ramble on, so just let me know if I'm rambling on here. But what led me to coming to America, when I tell you, like, me being in America was the biggest surprise and the biggest shock. And if you had told me I would have been here in 2013, or told me back like maybe a year and a half prior, I would have told you that you were a liar. Like, facts, right? And the story behind it was in 20, so back in 20, a little bit before 2011, my father had his first cancer episode. So it was like he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So it was not necessarily how would I put it? It was not the lights that I expected, because the strong man, I never saw him sick. I never saw him miss a day of work. And all of a sudden I get, I'm in school. They pull me out, because they pull me out of school at the time, and they say, hey, you got to go to the hospital. We just got a call about your father. And I see him just laying in bed. Just it's the memory's kind of vague, but not necessarily. I don't want to kind of get into graphic because there's going to be kids listening. And I
Right.
looked at that, and at that point in time, I was like, I gotta get my life together. Because I was still kind of like about to get out of high school. I was like, I gotta get my life together. And I remember I was like, okay, now my studies, I hit the books. I was like, man, I gotta get, good grades. I got good grades. I made sure that my grades were the A's, and I made sure that the records was good. And I remember after seeing that and seeing him, I kept thinking, I'm like, okay, if he passes away, what's gonna happen? Because my mom was diagnosed with a stroke when I was 2, right? So she had a stroke. So basically she couldn't walk. And I was like, okay, who's going to take care of my sick mother? Because he was the only sole provider, right? So there was no one who was going to take care of her. And I just thought to myself, I was like, man, my brother at the time was it's kind of like, I wouldn't even put him more in the picture, because he just took the road of, just doing crazy stuff and partying. And, there was no girl around in the zip code that he had and kind of try to hook up with. So I felt like there was a burden on my shoulders. And I remember at the time I was Googling, and I was like, because we didn't have the weirdest thing. We didn't have like, I had a cell phone, but I didn't have internet data on it. So I used to have to go to this, we call them like computer centers. So we go to the computer center, and you'd buy minutes. So you'd buy minutes in a sense to you buy 60 minutes of internet time. So I'd buy 60 minutes of internet time. And I was Googling, or Yahoo was a thing back then. But the quickest way to make the fastest money legally in the shortest period of time, right? Make the fastest money period legally in the shortest period of time. And I came up with the Google kept popping up with being a pilot, right? Being a pilot was the big thing that was like bam, 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 bam. Like I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna look up at this industry. So I looked it up. My late sister at the time, was dating a guy who was an operations manager for one of the local airlines. And he told me how much was making, which how much was making back then was like, I said like maybe $1,500 a month. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, damn, he's rich. I'm like, damn, this man's rich. Like 1,500 a month, equivalent right now. But I'm like, if I had 1,500 a month, I'm like, dude, that's like sugar daddy money, basically. And so I remember I asked him what was like I wanted to do what he was doing, but he's like, nah, you should go be a pilot, because being a pilot, you'd make about 2 grand or 2,500 a month. So I was like, okay, 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 okay. I can roll with that. And I remember, man, it was, I started, going and talking to as many people I knew who were, who had, parents in the industry, or, someone in the industry. And it turned out that one of my sisters, she had a friend who was the chief pilot of one of the local airlines. And I remember I spoke to him and I said, hey, I want to be a pilot. And he goes, and I was like, what do you recommend I do? He goes, well, you need to go to America. And I'm like, no, man, like, how's that possible? Like, there's no way I'm going to go to America. Like, America from, growing up was seen as this, it was next to heaven. There was heaven, and then there was America, right? That's
Right.
how we saw it. So it was like going to America was like, Kai, you're kind of getting close to God back then. And I'm like, that's not way that's gonna happen. But he's like, nah, you should go to America, because if you go to the local school here in the country, you're not gonna get the what's the word? You're not gonna get your license is not going to be valid and you're going to have to wait 5 years for employment, like 5 years. Okay. So I remember, man, it was when I say it was a miracle, man, this was a miracle. I still, thank God to this day. I remember I spoke to my pastor and I said, I was like, hey, I want to, this is what he told me. This is what I want to do. He goes, well, you need to, have you prayed to God about it? And I'm like, I don't think God's going to listen to me about, something like this. But I prayed to God about it, and it's weirdly weird my dad had recovered at the time, but by some weird, instance, my sister knew of my plans and she told my father about it. And he said, get some schools who are offering the program in America and let's talk to them. And I found a school in Texas. And oh man, they told me how much it was going to cost. It was going to cost about 80 grand, 80 grand for the whole training. And I said, 80 grand, 80, mind you, 80 grand, if you converted was it's equivalent of, just imagine somebody came to you and said, hey, it was going to cost, $1 million for a college degree. That's the
Right.
equivalent of what saying 80 grand to me was. So I said 80 grand. I was like, nah, it's not going to happen. So I was like, I went to my teacher and I was like, hey, I'm going to be a physics teacher. So what do because I was pretty good in physics at the time. And he said, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would like you to, you can intern here in the school. Absolutely. You could do this. And my sister heard about the plans. She goes, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm not, we don't have 80,000. She goes, well, have you told dad about it? I was like, no, I'm not going to go tell him about it. There's no point in wasting his time. And I went to him and I said, and she went to him and she told him about it. And then he said, to this day, I cannot, verbatim, he goes, tell the school to give you their bank account information. And I was like, tell the school to give me their bank account information. I was like, okay, all right. Why would I? Okay. So I get it. Okay. And then 2 weeks go by. I kid you not. He called me in the morning. So he's going to work. He's like, Emmanuel. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in trouble now. Okay. Because every time he says my full name, so it's like Emmanuel Igweh. Every time he says my full name, just like it just knows you're about to get a whooping. So I was like, okay, God, what did I do this time? So he calls me and he goes, tell the flight school to check their bank accounts. I just send them $20,000. And I was like, what? He's like,
Wow.
I didn't even have a passport at the time. Just so you know, I didn't even have a letter of admission. He just sent him money. And apparently what had happened was and this is where I told you, I said, most people say that I had a mean father, but I think I had the father that I needed at the time because he had leveraged all of his assets and all of his businesses, everything to get a loan from the bank to fund my school.
Mm.
So I that's why I said till this day I still believe that I had the best father that God could have ever given me. And I remember I emailed the school and I was like, hey, can you check? My father said he sent 20,000. Here's the confirmation number. And they go, yes. And dude, they fast tracked my paperwork. And within I'd say 7.5, 8 months of that, because I remember I went to the embassy, I went to the interview. They're like, wait, you already sent the money? You already did like within 8 months of him doing that, I found myself on a plane to Texas.
Wow, man. That's a powerful story. I ended up in the States, man. And again, hats off to your dad for believing in your vision, believing in your dream to come over here to the States. And like you said, just leveraging his assets to make sure you got the proper schooling. And it goes back to that point you made earlier. You had the best dad that you needed for your upbringing. And that's what it's all about. It's all goes back to perspective. So that's good stuff, Emmanuel, man. I appreciate you for breaking that down. So you make your way from Nigeria to Texas. What were those cultural shocks you experienced when you made it to the States?
Have you seen the movie with Eddie Murphy Coming to America?
Ah, classic for sure. Yes, sir.
Uh-huh. You went to Queens. It's like, Queens, we looking for a princess. We go to Queens.
Right.
And so I would say, man, it was let's just say I was over prepared, and I would say America is I don't want I want to think about a better way to phrase this. I think America is what you right? So I remember when I got on the flight and my flight first I went to Frankfurt, Germany, and then the connection 6 hours there, met some amazing people, then came here to Dallas, Texas. And I remember when I know it's gonna make me sound so like I don't even know how to call it, like, but I remember when I landed, well, first off, when I landed in Frankfurt, I was so amazed by the technology. I was so amazed by just the whole structure. And when I went to Dallas, I was staying at the campus at the time. And the one you want to know the one thing that I would say the biggest shock and biggest surprise was I was in a hotel and I took a nap because it was a long flight. So I came in, I stayed at a hotel and I took a nap. And I remember waking up and it was dark because you turn off the lights. I waking up, it was dark. And when I turned on the light, I was surprised. Do you know why?
Why?
So where I grew up in, there used to be this thing called, there used to be a thing where the power company would ration the electricity. So this neighborhood would, let's say you live in a neighborhood ABC, right? You get electricity for 8 hours while the other neighborhoods don't have it. And then it will move on to the next grid, then the next grid, and then that's it. So which means you'd have periods of blackouts, which means you'd have maybe 3 days to a week, sometimes a week and a half. We have gone to 3 weeks before we had a single like having the lights on. I remember when the lights would come on, kids would be screaming in the street, right?
Wow.
And we used to always say that the phrase we always just say was up NEPA. So NEPA was how you have Duke Energy, you have Florida Power Light, you have all that stuff. But we called them NEPA was the electric company time, and we would say up NEPA because we were like excited, so people would be screaming, raining down the street, and then that's it. Everybody, you'd go from like the entire neighborhood, everybody's outside playing, kids are playing, everyone's having fun, to the moment like we have electricity. The entire neighborhood is quiet and everyone is in their houses, right? I'm just like watching your shows. It was like, one of my favorite shows at the time was, I'd watch what you call it? Friends, believe it or not, Friends. The show would come up, and that's how I was able to kind of perfect my accent. Was I'd watch shows Friends, and I also would watch it also when I came to America as well. So there was a few shows that would come up at the time, and I remember when I came in and I turned on the light, and I was like, it's electricity, and I went in. And believe it or not, another shock was we used to, obviously, this is not ever in Nigeria because some Nigerians are going to watch this and be like, man, where did you grow up in? But where I grew up in, we used to go to a well to fetch our water. So we'd go to a well to fetch water. Like, you go to a bucket, you go to a well, you fetch the water, and you would shower. You take a bowl, like a cereal bowl. You take a cereal bowl and you would shower yourself with it. So usually you shower cold water, or if you had electricity, you could get hot water by using a heater to heat up that bucket, heat up the water in the bucket. And I remember I was in a hotel room and I turned on the shower. And man, I was like, whoa, what is this? What is this? Let's just say I was in a shower for like 2 hours, so hour and a half maybe. I would say 2 hours, so stops. Because I was like, wait, I don't have to go get a bucket. Because I actually was at the time, I was actually looking for a bucket. I was looking for a bucket to go get some water. That it felt like I just came from a village. Honestly, you guys, it sounds bad, but I remember the light in the shower was one thing that I would say was a big culture shock. And the third shock, man, believe it or not, the third shock was the biggest of them all. And I actually called my sister on WhatsApp, was Walmart.
Mm.
Walmart, because we had the equivalent of like flea markets,
Mhm.
right? That's how we would go get our stuff, like equivalent of flea markets, right? That's what was common in the area I grew up in. But I remember I went to Walmart, man, and I was like, man, it was organized. It was like, you had the shelves here, you had cookies, you had all this stuff. I bought what? I think I bought like $50 worth of bread.
Mm.
Okay, I bought so much bread. All the breads, most of pretty much all the breads expired, but I bought bread, man. I bought bread. I had stuff. I was like, man, I was so excited just by the cleanliness, the organization, and I mean, back at it now, I wouldn't say Walmart was that clean and organized, but because you have Target and all of that. But at the time, man, Walmart was, man, it was the creme de la creme. Because I remember I sent a picture to my sister. And I'm like, oh, you need to come and see this. Like, this is the supermarket. This is so amazing. And I felt like and then pizza was another one too, man. Pizza was, man, my mind was blown. But that's pretty much a few of the culture shocks. I can go on and on.
Wow, man. No, that's powerful. I appreciate you for sharing those culture shocks and just talking about how you grew up in Nigeria, having to go to the well and get water to bathe, and you come over here and there's an abundance of shower water and coming from where you come from, where there's a limited amount of power, and over here there's an abundance of power, and it's just great, man. Just hearing, I could just hear that gratitude in your voice when you came over here and you saw those things. You're like, man, in America it's just abundance. And I'm pretty sure you, to this day, you still just have a heart of gratitude being able to live in this country.
I would say this, man. I would say this. There's one thing I always do every single day, is I always express my gratitude to God for my life because, in a way, I mean, in a way, I think a lot of people take America for granted. A lot of people talk bad about America, oh, I want to live in all that stuff. But this country is the reason that after my father did end up passing away, and it was the ability, because I mean, free market capitalism and the ability to, I mean, just think about it. A Nigerian immigrant, came here, did everything I did. I mean, this country by far has given so much to me. I mean, I can't even say how I can even give back, but I am grateful for the opportunity to be here. I am absolutely 100% grateful for everything. I'm grateful to God too for the opportunity to be here and to, I mean, just even be amongst in a society where there's so much abundance.
Hmm.
Like you don't like you whatever you want, you can go. Everything you want and need is within a 5 mile radius.
Yes, sir. No, absolutely. And what you just said is spot on in terms of people taking America for granted, myself included, because I've never been in a situation like yours, coming from Nigeria, having to go to the well and get water. So, to your point, it's it's easy for us Americans to take America for granted. And I have been more intentional for the last few years, just in terms of waking up with a sense of gratitude, especially when I'm looking on the news and I'm seeing people in third world countries that really got it bad. I'm like, man, me being stuck in traffic, my problems really aren't that bad, man, compared to having to go fetch for water and find water in wells to bathe. And man, just salute to you, man, for your resilience and just having the heart of a champion, not letting them circumstances hold you back, man. That's what's up.
I appreciate it. And I would say this with the gratitude thing, because I do find myself sometimes, being in a position where, you are stuck in traffic and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, this blip, 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 cut me off, blip, 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 and you're saying all this stuff. And I honestly would say, I'm gonna say this, man. I recommend if you can and have the ability to and have the finances and resources to go check out another country just to go see, because the thing is we always see everyone always believes that their situation is worse until they see
Mhm.
somebody else's situation, right? Like
Right.
you can say, like someone might be like, "Oh man, you might have someone complain like, "Oh, like I can't eat meat or all this stuff or eat all this stuff," and I'm like, I remember a point. Didn't happen to me, but I remember a point where there was a family where there was a kid. He was sleeping always in class, and his teacher had asked him, like, why you were sleeping? And he's like, well, because and then they found out that the kid hadn't eaten in 3 days. And the reason why was because they had to ration the food in the family, in the house. Like they had to ration it. Like, it was either, the one or two kids would eat today, and then the other ones had to wait for another 3 days because they didn't have the money. And I always say this, I think people need to, I will recommend it. If you can have the resources and ability to, just go see what's out there, because once you see what's out there, you come back and you realize like, man, we if you make, because there's a statistic, if you make more than $35,000 a year in income, 35,000 gross, you are in a top 10% of income earners globally.
Mm. Wow. That's powerful, man.
That
And mm.
that yeah, so I'm just saying that I would recommend, if you can, I would recommend, man, if you get the chance to do it. Do it. Just go see what's out there. Even if it's just for because the thing is life is short. Like recently we were in Sedona, Arizona, and we went there for a wedding, and when I tell you the views, it was like seeing another planet. It didn't even feel like we were in America. It just felt the nature. I remember in Sedona it was like, dude, it felt like you were just living in one of those, like, cities where you're just waiting for people to just come out and be like, it's like a get out scene. Everyone was just so happy. It was like, it was just, I would recommend, man. I recommend if you get the chance to the ability to, you guys definitely should.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to that point, Emmanuel, I've definitely had the opportunity to travel a few places. In fact, I went to Jamaica a
Okay.
a few years ago. My wife and I went out there for our honeymoon, and we were going through the city, and man, just we were going through Montego Bay, and just seeing poor over in Jamaica, and seeing some of those houses and how they were looking like they were barely hanging on by a thread, like passing through those areas of town on the way to my all-inclusive resort. Yeah, it puts things into perspective. Like, man, they really got it bad, man. Like, there are some people out here who really have it bad, man. So to your point, just in terms of, I do encourage people to get a passport and get out of America. And to your point, go over to these different countries and really get a chance to see what poverty looks like. It'll definitely wake you up, man, for real.
I think it would definitely wake people up, but I think it would also give people a perspective of America and understanding, because I think there's a lot of people right now that, I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but I think there's a lot of people right now that think that, the future of America is gloom and bad, and they have so much like hate for the country. And I'm always like, hey, listen, if you go to anywhere else, it's not America, you'd see that it's a completely different world than you live in, like here. But yeah, man, absolutely. I think most people should do it. I think do it. And you've been to Jamaica, man, and I always like to say there's Jamaica and then there's Jamaican resorts.
Right.
So,
Right.
you go to Jamaica to go to the resorts. But yeah, no, it's definitely an eye-opening.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah, man, that's good stuff, man. I appreciate you just sharing your background and just your whole backstory, man. That's powerful stuff. So let's talk about what you got going on present day. Let's start with the Evolution Podcast. What inspired you to come into this podcasting space?
Ah, man. Okay, you want the truth or you want the vanilla, stuff? What do you want me? You want me to tell you exactly
Hey,
why I did it?
hey, man, tell the truth, but keep it family friendly.
Absolutely. I'm gonna keep it family friendly. Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
cool.
So I started a podcast after a conference I went to. So I remember I went to this conference. It was a business slash real estate conference, and I went to the conference because I have a business, but I also was like I wanted to meet more people, right? I wanted to meet more people. And I remember I went to the conference, and while I was on a flight, there was a guy there. We had chatting up, started talking, and it's like, yeah, you going to the conference? Yeah, so we, became acquainted, nothing too special. And the entry level for the ticket for the event was about $1,000. It was $1,000 baseline ticket, and then it was 3,500 for the second tier, and then it was $25,000, and it was $100,000 ticket, right? I paid $1,000. I got in. So I remember I went into I went in the conference, everyone's, getting the ID badges, pretty much getting in. And I ran into the guy and he had an escort. He had someone who was escorting him. And I was like, hey, nice to meet you. He was actually a guest on the podcast. And we started talking and he goes, and I saw he was a diamond member, which was he paid $25,000 for the ticket. Now, this was a 3-day event, right? So he paid 25,000 for 3 days. Just think about that. And we started talking, and he's like, yeah, I'm a diamond member. I'm like, dude, you paid 25 grand for this? He's like, yeah. And then he told me the story. He used to have a Nissan GTR, right? Nissan GTR, pretty fast car. And he sold his GTR to buy an Aventador. Now I was like, dude, why would you buy an Aventador? He goes, well, I wanted to join a Lamborghini club. I was like, okay, so he's like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Lamborghinis, but I wanted to join a Lamborghini club. And the only way I could join a Lamborghini club was by buying a Lamborghini. So I bought a Lamborghini. I was like, okay, all right. And I was like, so I was still kind of like the justification. I'm like, dude, why would you pay $25,000 for a 3-day event? And he was like, kind of like put him to the perspective of like, well, dude, you paid $1,000 and there's, roughly about 20,000 people here, and 80% of them all paid $1,000. And most of them are the employees of the people who paid 25 to 100 grand. And he's kind of made me understand. He's like, man, we're all going to go out to lunch. All people who paid 25,000, 100,000, we're all going to go out to lunch. So it's basically, it was a big networking event. And after that, I spoke to him post the event, and he's working on a deal for about 3.3 million dollars just off of a $25,000 event that he paid for. His return was that to me was an insane return. And I started thinking to myself, I was like, okay, how do I, because for the you would agree that mentors are very important in success, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Absolutely. So I was thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, so because I was in a room and I made sure I networked, man. I made sure I networked. I met with a lot of people, from people making businesses who were doing anything from $2 to $6 million a year to people doing businesses upwards of 140 million dollars, right? And I was like, okay, most of these individuals are busy. They're busy, right? Why would they talk to me? Why would they share information with me? And thought about it. I was like, well, one thing that most people who've succeeded want to do is they always want to, not majority of them, but I would say a high percentage of them want to help. They want to give back, right? They want to give back, but they don't believe in giving back money, because we've all been in a position where we gave somebody money, and then once we give them money, they come back to you and say, hey, I want more money, and then you give them again, and all of a sudden now you're just enabling them to be dependent on you. You're just creating a dependent. But they
Right.
want to share information. They want to share information. So I said, okay, if I create the podcast and I say, hey guys, you come on my podcast and you get to share information with me, you get to tell me, it's in a way it's beneficial to you, because I can't, if you're doing 20 million a year, I'm not gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna pay you $5,000 an hour, 10,000 an hour to come talk to me, versus I'm like, hey, you might come on the podcast. And I realized people love that. Like, we just had a podcast event with a guy just today. He controls more than a $250 million in real estate, right? We had an hour conversation, and he discussed a few things that we're like, hey, you know what? I actually want to, a few investment funds that I want to invest in. And he's like, we spoke about it, and then we're gonna end up doing business with the guy. But it's kind of like I would never have spoken to the CEO of a fund, of a real estate fund that's doing that's controlling more than $250 million in real estate. So that's kind of the whole deal why I started a podcast, was to get around people who are achieving things that I would want to learn. From you, I also learned a lot of things from what you're doing in the community. And there was a lot where I could benefit from people, but then also you could share your expertise with other people who want to basically like me, like, hey man, I might also want to learn what you got to say.
Mm. That's powerful stuff, man. I appreciate you for sharing that backstory, how you got in the podcasting space. And it's so interesting, Emmanuel, because like you were saying, why would they want to talk to you, these guys that are multimillionaires? I'm gonna tell you something I learned a long time ago. People love to talk about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a story. And if you would just ask the question, hey, you want to come on the podcast and tell your story? Most people are gonna say yes. So I can understand how and why you felt that way. Hey, why would this multimillionaire want to be on my show? But man, everyone has a story, and humans, we love to talk about ourselves. So hats off to you for getting the podcast started and getting those guests on the podcast. That's what it's all about, networking.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely agree. So I would always say this, guys. If you're in a position where you want to learn something, start a podcast and just go invite the people that you think would help. Or you always want to. Here's the thing: is I know it's gonna sound bad, okay, and I think I'm gonna lose 50% of people that we start becoming friends. But before I lose you guys, is I want you guys to think about this perspective of, if you wanted to learn how to swim,
Hmm.
would you want someone who is an experienced, diver, who's maybe even won in the Olympics, or would you want somebody who basically, is just kind of like in the basic position as you, to teach you how to swim?
Right. Oh,
Right? You
professional.
want to you want a professional, right? Because we
Right.
all value expertise. We all value expertise. So I would say it's kind of selfish, but it's also kind of selfless. So there's a selfish part of it, is I think, to succeed, it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna sound bad. I think to succeed, you need to be 70% selfish, and I think you need to be 30% selfless. The reason why is this: is if you have a bottle, if you have a jug of water, right? You have a jug, and you have to use that jug to fill 10 cups, right? What does that jug need to have? Water. You need to
Water.
have
Right.
water. You need to have water in the jug to be able to fill other cups. So that means is it is degree of selfishness towards that jug to gaining information, gaining that knowledge to be able to fill onto others. So hence the same thing with the podcast. I would say, if you guys want to learn, if you guys want to move forward in life, I think you need to meet people who are doing better than you in life, but you also need to find a way to provide value to them. So there's an element of that. Hey, I want to get that information. I'd say if you start a podcast, you can invite Doug to be on your podcast. You can invite people who are, achieving what you want to achieve to come on. You might not even have an audience, but I think you should do it because, one, they love, like you said, they love to talk about themselves, but I think it also helps you, like, you get little things, little nuggets, little things that you learn from each person you talk to. And I'll tell you something, money, the to make money, it's not about like my me being a pilot and will come to America. It came off of a conversation that I had with someone.
Hmm.
You know, that's it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing. It just literally, me being here came off a conversation I had with someone else. So I would say the same thing. If you want to succeed in anything, you got to find somebody to talk to about it. It's all communication. Communication, I would say, is probably 80% of success.
Absolutely, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Everything you said was spot on, and it didn't sound crazy. You have to be 70% selfish and 30% selfless. I agree wholeheartedly. You have to fill up your own jug, because how are you going to pour into others if you're not filling up yourself? And how do you fill up yourself? Like you just pretty much just spoke to, building those relationships, adding value, not being a person that's a taker. You're a real student of the game. You get around people and you're asking questions from a student's perspective, because a lot of times we as humans, we have this ego thing where we think, okay, such and such makes he makes millions of dollars, and even though I know I need to learn from such and such, I'm too egotistical, I'm too proud to ask such and such for the game. So no, I appreciate you, man. I mean, and that's one thing I'm a big proponent of, man. I'm a lifelong student, man. Like right now, I'm learning some things about real estate investing, and I have a mentor who's sitting down with me once a week teaching me the game, and I'm completely in student mode when he's giving me different nuances and different things to to say when I'm on phone calls with potential sellers, to all the different nuances within real estate investing, I'm listening, man. A lot of people would be farther along if they would just have enough humility to just sit down and say, "Hey, Emmanuel, I know nothing about X, Y, and Z, and you're a professional. May you teach me." And most people would say, "Yes, let's get together." I mean, they're not going to let you waste their time. Like when you sit down with a mentor once a week, you got to take notes, and when you come back the next week, you need to be 1% better than you was the week before. You can't be coming back every week. Hey, hey, help me, help me, help me, but you're not doing anything. But that's great, man, that you've leveraged relationships, man. Powerful stuff.
If you don't mind me asking, what necessarily are you focusing on in real estate?
So right now I'm mastering the aspect of wholesaling, because in terms of real estate investing, there's different avenues you can get into: buy and hold, fix and flip, wholesaling, novations. For me, wholesaling is the thing that really caught my eye because it's to me it's a great entryway to essentially build up enough capital to just become my own bank and eventually start buying and holding and renting out Section 8 houses. So I do have an exit strategy.
I think yeah, I think you're on it, man. It's I've heard a lot about wholesaling. I mean, I even heard recently about wholesaling land, and this
Yes.
came off a podcast. You can, buy a few you can wholesale, let's say you buy, 50 acres for 10,000 an acre for, for that would be what 500 grand
Hmm.
ish. You buy it for 500 grand and then you subdivide it and then you sell, maybe, plots or 5 or 10 acres of 20,000. So you're literally flipping land,
Right.
and so you start to, there's so much you can do in the real estate space, man. But the only way you can learn how to do, just like you said, you got to find somebody else who's succeeding at it. And you're like, hey, listen, what's your strategy? And people will tell you.
Right. They will. I mean, and it's almost scary how much they're willing to tell you just by asking because most people, Emmanuel, don't ask. They're too proud to ask. They're too proud to say, "Hey, can you sit down with me 30 minutes, an hour a week and just teach me the different nuances of X, Y, and Z?" And most people would say, "Yeah." And they'll
Yeah,
and they'll actually hop on a Zoom with you or they'll meet you in person, man. So that's great that you were able to get the podcast off the ground. And just in terms of from the time you realized you wanted to come into the podcast space, let's talk about the action portion. How long did it take you to come up with a name and actually get started and reaching out to people and getting the podcast off the ground?
So okay, so what's funny is I used to have it's gonna sound so funny, but I used to have a dating service that I had previously. And I had a dating service that I used to have previously. It was fairly successful, and I had the YouTube channel and I would just put out little advice on there. Like, most of the videos, are pretty much taken down right now because I don't want that. That's not on par with the brand image. But it was fairly successful, and I was charged a premium for it. It was fairly successful. But what I noticed about it was people would not. It was just like you said. You tell them, "Hey, do ABC." They do DEF, and then they'll come back and be like, "Well, it didn't work." And I'm like, "Did you do ABC?" Like, "Well, but," and then they try to put their spin on it. So it just kind of became a point at which I realized there was a deep rooted problem, and I just didn't invest enough time in it to see it to fruition. But how long it took me to have to start the podcast? Honestly, what I did was I had the microphone that I had going on, and I just went on my phone and I called up people that I knew, especially from the event. And I said, "Hey, I'm starting up a podcast. You might be my first guest." And the first guy I had on was doing about $150,000 a month in net profit. And he's like, "Okay, sure, I'll be on the podcast." I'm like, "How about tomorrow?" He goes, "Yeah, okay." And then boom, he's on. The next guy was like, "Hey, he was the guy that had a $3 million real estate." I'm like, "Hey, you mind being on my podcast? Just starting up, small thing I'm doing." He goes, "Yeah." And then I just called everyone. I was like, "Hey, I know was an insurance guy. He was doing about 1.4 million a year." And I was like, "Hey, you want to be on?" He's like, "Okay, sure." That's super cool. And pretty much it all just jumped on. It was not the best production. It was on Zoom, not the best production at all, not the best anything. I just knew that there are people who want something and then there are people who take. And my father always used to say something to me. He taught me a lesson. He goes, it's gonna sound wrong and sound weird. He goes, whatever you want to do, you have to impose your will. You have to impose your will, which means you have to take so much action that it doesn't matter. You don't, and the key thing was not perfect action, because the little background story of my father, he graduated college with a chemical engineering degree, and he had 3 years of no jobs, and he ended up we used to sleep as a family. Just imagine there's 5 kids. We used to sleep in a 1 bedroom, living off my mom's. This was before I was born. Was living off my mom's salary as a nurse. Okay, living on my mom's side was a nurse in one bedroom, and we didn't have any nothing. And my father used to go to, go ask for jobs, and he found somebody who let him apprentice for 2.5 years on no pay, no money. But he just worked, man. He just worked. And he just, after that, he was like, listen, he just told me, he's like, after growing up, he's like, whatever you want, you just got to be willing to not take no for an answer. And you don't have to be perfect. Like one thing I do now, I'll be very honest with people. I don't structure and go too much into the planning, because the more I plan, the less I do. It sounds really weird, but the more I plan, the less I do. So, but the more I just do, the more I can improvise.
Mm. No, that's spot on, Emmanuel. I'm the same way. I don't do a lot of planning, and because when I start planning too much, I start overthinking,
Hmm.
overanalyzing, and you just honestly, you just stuck in limbo. You stuck in
Hmm.
limbo, and you like, should I go left? Should I go right? Man, I just go left, and I just keep going left until I run into a brick wall. I turn around, I go right. I just make a decision, and I make it right later on, man. Like you said, imperfect action, just go. And hats off to your dad for just telling you, like, impose your will. And man, and to me, that sounds like don't spend too much time making making choices. Make a decision, stick with it, and go.
Yeah, I mean, facts, because there's a lot of people that go too much into the detail. They get bogged up into the detail of, oh, is this perfect? I would say this. I would say this though. I would say that there's also a point in which you have to understand that you have to do and then reevaluate, right? So
Hmm.
reevaluate in a sense is to not much planning, but more reflection, right? So it's execute and then reflect. So execute, reflect, and then you come back in again. So it's more of, like before I put out content, what I would do is I would find something I'm very interested in. Like when I used to do content, I used to do solo content if I want to put out some more content. And I'll find something I'm interested in. And I'll spend like 30 minutes to an hour just watching the videos and whatever people talking about it, or people talk about it. And I'm just like, hey, okay, cool. Turn on the camera and talk about my opinion on it. Not perfect, because the more you shoot for perfection, the less that you have execution. So just like you said, if someone's watching this right now, whatever it is that you want to do, find a mentor that's in it. That's the only thing you need. Because the thing about mentors is this: I used to be a flight instructor, and I used to teach people how to fly. And what I would do is I would, just I would have, I trained to today I'm roughly about two. And what I would do is when they came in, right, they would be like, oh, what do I study? I'm like, oh, you study this book, this book, this book, this book. They go, do I need to know everything before I fly? I'm like, nope. Here is a summary of all we're gonna do. I just summarize it. All you have to do is memorize this, and then I will explain it, and you begin to understand while we do it, and then your studying is gonna get better. That's it. I was basically a mentor in that space. So they'll come in and they'll be like, okay, could you memorize it? Okay, repeat everything to me. They're like, bam, 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 bam. I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, surprise, repeat it again. And I've said it, and then we'll go fly, and they'll be like, still kind of trying to figure out the ropes. And I'm like, all right, now watch me do it. I was like, okay, remember tell me what I'm going to do now. They go, okay, you're going to pull the power, and then you're going to pull up, and you're going to do this. Okay, what else am I going to do? I'm going to do this. Okay, what else am I going to do? I'm going to do this. And then they're literally just walking me through the steps. I'm like, all right, good. You see, that's easy. Now I'm like, okay, now you do it. And then I'll just say it, just talk me as you talk to me slowly as you're doing it. And next thing you know, they're doing it. Next thing you know, I used to have because flying is not something to eat, but I had a 96% pass rate of people who just go in, but they're just like, they were ready for the final exam, which is so weird. They were ready, we're getting off, but they would be ready to get their license as a pilot. Literally, I would say, to give you a reference of time, 4 months before, because I'm just like, hey, most of this stuff is fluff. You don't need all this fluff. Just here's the meat. Here's the meat. The rest of it is the bone. Take the meat. That's the bone. You don't need any of that stuff. That's it. No more fluff. And I think that's pretty much my take on it, is just execute, find somebody who's doing it, and like, hey, what do I not need to know? You don't need to know all this stuff. Okay, so I should just focus on this. Boom. And then everything else you start to understand as you.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And I commend you for teaching them that way. Like, hey, you don't need to know you don't need to know everything about flying, because if I told you everything, you'd get overwhelmed and quit today.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. I had a kid who got his pilot's license before he got his driver's license. And which is so funny, you can get a pilot's license if you get a driver's license. So hilarious. But yeah, I was telling him, I was like, dude, I would ask him, like, I would always say this. I'm like, how much time are you willing to are you willing to invest in learning? I always just ask them that. How much time are you willing to invest in learning? And they'll be like, or I'm like, how much time are you willing to invest and how much money are you willing to invest in this as well? And then I'd have people who'd be like, well, honestly, I'm paying for this myself, so I'm on a low budget. I'm like, okay, cool. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna switch your plan to you are now going to do more observing of your peers. So they'll come along with me, ride-alongs. They'll ride along with me when I go with my students, other students. And then whenever I'm flying, they'll be like, hey, can I ride along? I had one guy who the dude was like, they were gonna kick him out. We ended up becoming best friends. And I'm like, I just tell him like, dude, just come with me on ride-alongs because he was running out of money, and he just came with me on ride-alongs, and then he'll be walking through the process of the whole step. So rather than telling me what to do, he'd be basically saying it in his head, and as the other student is doing it, and then whenever it comes time for him to fly, I remember when he passed his exam, the one of the chief operators in his school was like, "What? He did?" Like they're like, "What? He passed?" They're like, "He passed." I was like, "Yeah, man, it's pretty easy. He's a pretty smart dude." But it was just a simple thing of like, yeah, just basically just watch and like, you just kind of focus on what matters.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, man. That's powerful stuff. So you rocking and rolling, doing great things in the podcasting space. Have some powerful guests on there, myself included. I definitely en enjoyed being a part of the Evolution Podcast and what you're building over there, man. So what exactly inspired the name, the Evolution Podcast?
The name evolution came from we all have a story, right?
Mm,
We all have a story, and I believe the origins dictates the future, right?
mm,
So your origin and what you started in would almost often dictate the trajectory of where you end up. So, for instance, if you the tougher the background of somebody who achieved success, the more tougher it is, the more that they can accomplish, right? So think about it in a sense too. There's a saying that God will not give you more than you can handle. Right. And I think that's very true because I believe that everything that happens in your life is a process of making you stronger. So think about it. You ever, and you pray, right? Christian?
yes, sir.
Okay. You ever notice that when you pray to God and you say, hey, God, I pray for tolerance, right? God, please let me tolerate. What is the one thing that, or you pray for something? What is the one thing God would do? He would test you with the opposite of whatever it is that you want.
Absolutely.
Right. If you say, hey God, now that's why the thing is you got to be careful I'm a big believer now. You got to be careful what you pray for. The reason why I'm saying that is not because, oh, God will not answer. It's the fact that the way God will answer it is not the way you expect it. So I give an example. This which would tie into the name, the evolution name. I This year I was praying for patience. I'm like, listen, don't pray to God for patience. Pray for something else because he will test you with exactly what you're praying for.
Mm,
I prayed for patience, and guess what? I had to be a lot. Listen, when I mean it'd be things in which I seriously want, but it would be within like an inch, like it would be within like a reach of my hand, but I can't touch it. Right? That's just a metaphor. I can't touch it. It's something I can see it. I can like, but I can't. But then I have to wait weeks and months for it. Well, the God's like, I was like, you pray for patience. So I'm testing you to patience. So you got to be more patient. So same thing with evolution. I think the stories of what you've endured has made you stronger. And what's made so I just want to know like what is the driving force behind, pretty much everyone that I have on the podcast. Like what's that driving force? Like what's the wiring in your head? Almost kind of in a way, what's the tragedy that you had to overcome to give you the spirit of perseverance?
mm. And that's powerful stuff, man. And what you just said about praying, that is spot on. I've never thought about it like that, but that's why I love these conversations because I get a chance to gain a new perspective. And it's spot on. You pray, well, for me, praying for praying for optimal health and praying for a sound mind. And it's amazing how God to put those donuts, McDonald's, all those things in the way of what you're praying for. You're praying for optimal health. You want to be in the best shape of your life. You want to go to the doctor and have a clean bill of health. And God will continually test you with just those different little nuances of life, man. So I know that's a small example, but it's spot on to what you were saying. Be careful what you pray for because you're gonna get a test.
You go. That's the thing. Is just like a funny story. Is if you look at the story of the Israelites, right, and the Egyptians, they prayed to God for freedom. They wanted freedom,
Right,
right? But most people don't understand that the way God works is He doesn't give you what you want immediately, right? Because you have to. Because the thing is, if you knew how to make $1 million, you would already be making $1 million. But the
right,
thing is, when God gives you something, He doesn't want you to lose it. So He gives you the tips and the resources needed and the skill sets needed to be able to maintain it. So he gives gives you the so most of the time, if you look at the story of the Israelites, right? They went from captivity to confusion, right? Think
Right.
about it, right? They went from the slavery to wilderness
Right.
for 40 years, right? And then after that, but then again, inside of that confusion, before he gave them the promised land, he was basically giving them a test because he was testing them to say, how are you going to react when you become your own person, when you have to govern yourself without me?
Mm.
Right? How are you going to react? What are you going to do when you have to govern yourself without me? What are you going to do when you become a nation? Because I can't just make you a nation automatically. Because if I make you a nation automatically, guess what? You have no grounds to stand on. You have no history. You have no background. You have no knowledge. You have nothing. So, which means it's the equivalent of giving a child the key to a Ferrari that never drove in a Honda Accord.
Right.
You know, it's like if you take an 18, like, hey man, here's a Ferrari. You bet you believe that they're gonna be coming back, and you'll be like, hey, your car's getting towed, right? Because it's the same thing. It's like before God gives you something, He's got to give you something close to it, a test to make sure that you're worthy of it. Because this way, when you have it, you won't lose it, right? The reason why most people who win the lottery within 3 to 7 years, something happens to them. Right?
Right.
Go look
Right.
at the history. Look at history of that. That's the reason why you don't want quick. That's the reason why you don't want quick anything. Because the thing is to say this is money comes with slow problems. Fast anything comes with slow problems because you never get the ability to understand how to maintain. Like if you make money quick, you don't understand how to budget. So guess what? When you go, you swipe, 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 and next thing you're like, wait, why am I broke? You make money again, swipe, 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 swipe. Why am I broke? It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same philosophies. I think the way God works is He gives you the ability to make step by step processes because like same thing with patience. The moment I started thinking how to be patient by filling my time with other productive things, man, I just tell you right now, I'm just chilling. That's basically it. I'm like, all right, God, let God lead.
Absolutely, man. That's powerful stuff. So you're rocking and rolling, doing great things in the podcasting space. Let's talk about what you got going on with your other business venture, RIZN Results. What is it? What is that all about?
Oh man, Rising Results. Rising Results has been a thorn in my side and also been a blessing that I can actually rave about. So Rising Results, it started out as a being a pilot in a way. I used to notice every time I spoke to people and I would tell them I was a pilot, they'd be like, there was a difference of like people saw you as out of this world because you were doing something that, was like, man, aren't you scared of heights? Aren't you all this stuff? And I always felt like there was no way I could add value to them. I couldn't add value. I couldn't be like, oh, well, I can help you, because I'd have people like, like, oh man, financial stuff, like how could they make money, all that stuff. And there was really nothing. There was nothing I could do to help. And I kept thinking to myself, and I was like, how can I do something that would help people? That was the best thing. How can I do something that would help? How can I physically contribute to helping others? And I thought about, we started a B2B solution for business owners in the beginning, which was more of a virtual assistant solution. And that was something we did for the process of giving you the ability to, delegate tasks to a virtual assistant to help. That phenomenal business sold that did pretty well. And then we went into the software side of Rise Results as a software. I like to think about it as it's a business in a box. So imagine what is the number one thing most businesses struggle with? They struggle with customer acquisition, right? They struggle with customer acquisition and customer retention. So what Rising Results does is it solves both of that problems in the sense as to it gives you the ability to be able to market your business automatically, paid advertising, um, automatically without any advertising experience on the front end to solve your customer acquisition problem. And on the back end, we have resources such as texting, emailing, and all templates that are all done completely with AI. You don't have to do anything that will help you retain your customers. So that's basically the full nutshell of what Ryzen did. And that it has been very lucrative.
Hmm. Wow, man, that's powerful. Just your drive to help people is what inspires you to come into this space and create this product. And to your point, just being able to identify what businesses need. Because one thing about it, Emmanuel, and a lot of people, myself included, up until a couple of years ago, we have to realize it's not difficult to become wealthy in this country. You have to just find a problem and provide a solution. Like most of there are so many problems out here just waiting on a solution. And hats off to you for being able to identify this problem and create a solution for it. So I'm not shocked that you've been able to thrive with this business. What exactly got you interested in coming into the tech space in general?
Well, if you look at the growth, if you look at the current growth, there's an increase in the demand for automation, and the reason why there is because there's an increase in demand for automation because of the decrease in the labor being provided, right? So if you look at it, the way the economy works is based off of labor is probably one of the biggest things. So, you know, the more people that you have working in an industry, right? The more physical people you have working, the more there's an opportunity for growth. So, for instance, if you want to scale, let's say Facebook or Facebook wanted to scale, for instance, Facebook would hire, let's say they're doing $200 billion and they wanted to do a half a billion, right? Then they need to hire a specific amount of engineers. So maybe they'll hire another 100 engineers, give or take, right? So based off of specialized labor. And then I started realizing that in the current trend and current trajectory, the next generation of people are moving away from physical sources of income generation, right? There's more people that want to be influencers, there's more people that want to be running online businesses, and there's more people that want to be in a space in which they can travel the world and not be tied into a geographical location. There's a reason why we have the most renters that we've ever had. We have the most people who are basically working in one state while generating income in another state. So I
Mhm.
just thought to myself, in the tech space, most businesses are not most small businesses, specifically small to medium-sized businesses doing less than 100,000 a year, do not have the ability to go ahead and hire expert, skilled marketing, advertising labor. It's something where it's going to cost you 40 to 45,000 a year. And if you factor in the operating costs, you're not going to be able to feed your family, right? Because the average business owner makes less than 70 grand a year. So I thought to myself, I was like, all right, what is a solution I can give to them that is like, it might be a little bit of a learning curve, but you can run and operate this business for less than 6 hours a week, right? You can operate a solution for less than 6 hours a week. So rather than paying someone 40, you can operate less than six. That's where the tech space came in. And we actually are a subsidiary of another parent company, where our parent company was solving the solution. And, the idea was phenomenal. I started with them when they pretty much started up back in the mid like 2018, 2019. And, we've been great partners since then. So that's why I got into tech space. So I'm not the techie. I can code, I can do all that stuff. But the different languages that you're working in, the machine learning, all that stuff, man, everything's evolving so fast. Like it used to be every 5 to 7 years, you as a executive of your company or run your operations, you need to improve your skill sets. Then it became every 18 months. Now I think it's less than every 90 days. There's a new technology that's coming up.
Mm. Yeah, man, that's powerful, man. How you got introduced, how you decided to come into this tech space. And again, it just goes back to what I was just talking about earlier, just in terms of being able to identify a problem, which you were able to identify these small mom and pop businesses that don't have the, like you said, the money, the funds to go out and pay for marketing at a high level. You can come in and provide that service, provide that automation. And yeah, AI, man, it's taking over. And that's great that you are on that you're early in the game. Like you're in this space, rocking and rolling. And yeah, man, tech is so dope because you don't have to be a coder. Like I don't code. I mean, I'm in tech, but I don't code. But just the sector of tech that I'm in cybersecurity, understanding policies and understanding things, understanding how everything works from a 10,000 foot view. And granted, AI is taking over a lot of jobs, and I mean, this it is what it is. So it's key that you're learning it, I'm learning it, and people shouldn't be afraid of AI. They might as well just roll up their sleeves and figure it out and figure out how to make AI work for them.
Yeah, the thing is this, most people don't. I live by the mantra of whatever you fear will eventually control you.
Hmm.
Either physically or emotionally, whatever you're afraid of. If you're afraid of, I'll take for instance a single guy that's afraid of going to talk to a girl, for instance, right? That fear would control him to the point in which it will prevent him from being able to have normal social interactions with his fellow human being. Take for instance another person who is afraid of taking risk and investing in themselves. Eventually that fear will control them to keeping them in a lower economic status. So that's the thing, is whatever you're afraid of will control you. And there's a lot more people who are afraid of AI because they see AI as taking jobs away. And 1,000,000% it will take jobs away. Same thing with the internet. The internet took thousands of jobs away. But the
Right.
reality is it also created new ones. So and I think we're in a society where you have to adapt. You have to embrace. We have to be in an embracing mode versus a fear mode. Because if you're afraid of AI, at some point, somebody who knows more about AI will be the one writing your paycheck.
Right. Exactly. That's spot on, Emmanuel. That's exactly what you just said is 100, 1000% correct. What you fear controls you. And yeah, you sitting there thinking AI is going to take jobs. Yeah, the internet took jobs. And AI, man, it's like this. Either get with it, figure out what you need to figure out, how to use it for you, or someone who knows how to use it. Yeah, they're going to take a
Yeah,
job.
I mean, you gotta think about it. Cars took jobs from horses. I
Right.
mean, so I mean, it took jobs from horses and people who had to have stables that to rent out the horses and all the people that control the horses and all that. It took the jobs, but then again, those people who control the horses were like, yeah, 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 all that stuff. I'm not a horse rider, so I'm not
No,
sure.
no problem.
But but they if they are the people right now where they're the modern day people who are driving for Uber. They're the modern day people who are owning Turo, right? Renting out their cars. Because the thing is, we're human beings, and our greatest skill set is our ability to adapt to a new environment, right? So, and that's the reason why the people who are the human race have survived so long because we've adapted to our environment. People who don't adapt get left behind, and history doesn't take kindly to people who refuse to adapt. So now I'm going to say this: anyone who's listening to this, if you're afraid of AI, just take a course on it. Just learn about it. Take a course on it, and then just go on Facebook Marketplace and say, "Hey, I know this. Anyone needs any help regarding this?" Even if nobody pays you about it, but guess what? You have one skill set that you've checked off, and it's a. I always say this, right? You know how they say, I can't remember what the drug is, but one of the bad stuff. It's a gateway to doing all the bad stuff.
Right.
Learning, right? I'd say it's 15 minutes of learning a day is a gateway to add in, I would say roughly, this is no guarantee, so I don't want to be like, man's guarantee, but it's a gateway to add in an extra $15,000 a year to your income in the next 5 to 10 years. Because that 15 minutes that you say, I'm going to learn, I'm going to either watch a course, because once you start watching a course, what's the next thing you're going to do? You're going to start joining a community. Then you're going to join a community, and you're going to be like, hey, who's doing well in this? Hey, can you help me from this? How are you monetizing this? All it just it's just a way to open questions. The next thing you start asking people, next thing you find yourself in a room in which you might be making 40,000 a year to now you're making 50,000 a year. To next now you're making 70. Who knows? Right. But I would say this is learning. You got to keep learning. And if you fear it, it's because you don't know it. That's it.
Right. Absolutely. And the thing is, Emmanuel, we all come into this world knowing nothing. We don't know how to walk, we don't know how to talk, we don't know how to feed ourselves, and we figured that out. So it's amazing to see people who figured that out are afraid to figure out AI. I mean, it's interesting, but hey, either get your mind right or get left behind. That's the
Facts.
way I see it. Yeah, it's
Facts.
amazing, man. So rising results. What inspired the name, man? Like I'm big on inspiration, man. So like what inspired you to name it Rising Results?
It was inspired because I needed something that was a conversational starter, but I needed something that was also going to be, I needed a household name that was also going to be a word that was added in the English dictionary, right? So think about it. Facebook, right? Before Facebook was invented, Facebook was not a word we used, right?
Right.
uh Meta. Before, Meta, I mean, there's Meta, the way of looking at it, MySpace. So there's specific things that they start to gather enough attention that eventually they get into the English dictionary. So I started Rising. There was not really any big, thing to it, but my vision of it is I have a big vision of how I've seen it, the buildings, the whole 9 yards, and it just I want to be a unique something unique. But the problem with being unique is also you have to deal with the problem of you have to educate the market, right? When you're unique, you have to educate the market, or you have to get enough people to know about your product. So I just wanted something that was unique. There was nothing big. So funny thing was, it used to be when I had my dating program, it used to be Rising Evolving, right? And then I broke them into two: Rising Results,
Hmm.
Evolution Podcast. So they
Nice.
they kind of span from two of them. Yeah.
Okay, nice. No, that's great, man. I mean, that's a very organic way to come up with the name. Just wanted to create a new word in the English dictionary. Like, no, that's a big enough drive to want to create a unique name and be in your own lane. And man, that's just powerful stuff, man. So you've done great things. You're doing great things, and will continue to do great things in both the podcasting as well as the tech space, which leads to my next portion, vision. What are some of your short-term and long-term goals you feel comfortable sharing in the podcasting and tech space, respectively?
My long-term goal is to have at least 7 billion people that know of my so my biggest thing is this is the greatest honor I could do for my father is to make sure more people know his last name. Because the thing is this is the greatest honor I can give him is is saying his name to keep his memory alive. Like, think about this, right? Just off of our podcast, we're talking about him. Now, maybe 20, 30, 40 people watch this video or listen to this audio. Those 30 people are gonna be like, oh, they're gonna know about my father. So in a way, I want to, the more I can get, the podcast out there, the more I can get the name out there, the more I can get the last name out there, because that is the only, I ask myself, what is the greatest way I can pay homage to my father? What's the greatest way I can honor him? Is the greatest way I can honor him is by making sure most people remember him, right? Most
Mm.
people know him, right? That's the only thing, because to me he was a great father, but most people don't know him. But if they know that he was such a big inspiration and a big point in steering me to where I'm at here, I'm actually honoring him just by doing that. So that's my biggest thing is when I say 7 billion people, if 7 billion people know me, and also from that, those percentage of people know about my father. That's great. And another thing is I know someday I have a 5-year-old son turning 6. I know someday that my son is going to listen to this podcast. I mean, maybe by the time he's listening to it, he's going to be like, Dad, you had some really, really bad editing. I'll be like, listen, man, what do we have to do? It's 2024. So,
Right.
so I want to, I have three things that I'm working on is one, the goal is to publish a book, which will be coming out shortly. And also the podcast is a good way that if life lessons, I just like, hey, son, listen back to the podcast. Go from episode 1 to episode 8. Go from episode this to this. Listen to this episode. I cover this and this with Doug. Doug told about the story of how he did this. If you want to know how about it, watch the podcast. So
Mhm.
that's one thing I can use as a life lesson for my kids. And then also the big vision, the short-term vision with the business. Honestly, the short-term vision of the business for now is getting into a position in which I can take on more people who can work with me locally. Because right now, most of my teams are remote. Who can work with me locally, and we can build something bigger. Because RIZN is not the software is not what would I call it? It's not the end all be all. It's the entry level to the plans that I have. I have big things that I want to do with the brand, because Ryzen results is the software solution, but Ryzen itself is a brand. Same way you have Amazon Prime, Amazon TV, Amazon Go, Amazon, all that stuff, right? Amazon is the brand, right? So Ryzen is the brand that I'm building. And from that, it's going to be Ryzen t-shirts, it's going to be Ryzen, all that stuff. But the long-term vision is to build it to be, like I said, a name and dictionary, a household name, but a brand that will live on, like when, 50 years from now, people will be saying last name, Ryzen. Those are the two things I kind of want to, and I also want to meet, honestly, man, I want to one day interview the president of the United States. I want to interview the president of the United States, because I think that would have been the top echelon of hitting the podcast game, is having the president on, whoever the president is at the time, um, on the podcast, because it would be fantastic, because it'd be like, hey, you come from being an immigrant to now you're sitting face to face, 4 feet, 3 feet away from the person running hopefully at that time, still the most powerful country on the planet.
Mm. Powerful stuff, man. Those are both great short-term, long-term goals for both businesses. And I have no doubt, man, you're going to keep expanding, thriving, and doing big stuff, man. That's good stuff, man.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. And I always like to say, man, it's you have to. The reason why I say most people need to have a short term and a long term vision is, uh, the long term vision, the short term vision more or less has to be just measurable, achievable, quantifiable goals. All right, it's just quantifiable goals. So, it could be something as simple as, I want to, let's say financially, right? Let's say your end goal is to have 20 million. Like, hey, I want to save 10 grand, right? I want to save 5 grand. It's measurable, right? So same thing. My short-term vision is just to have more people working locally with me, helping me grow the Ryzen brand. And hopefully, in the next 20, it's a 20-year game for me, right? I'm playing 20 to 25 years. So the next 20 to 25 years, we have something that we are a household name.
Absolutely. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. So as we wrap up the podcast, Emmanuel, I want to ask the million-dollar question. I originally started this podcast to highlight the greatness connected to the city of Montgomery. However, I'm expanding, and this is a new step for me, and I'm all about growth. I'm all about stepping outside of my comfort zone. So the typical question that I would ask people connected to Montgomery, I won't ask. But what I do want to know is, when it's all said and done, and you're 99 years old, 100 years old, 105, however long you want to live. When you're at that age and the clock is winding down, when you look back over your life, what do you want to be able to say you did? What's gonna make you the most proud when you're in those final moments, final years of your life looking back?
What would make me the most proud, if I'm being honest with you, it's gonna be a little bit surprising because the more for me to say that, I have to tell you a conversation I had with my son.
Hmm.
So back in January 2022, we were talking and I asked him, I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be like you. And that on its own to this day, I've been gung ho going, just like pretty much just working until when he said that to me. And I asked myself, I said, am I, my life right now, is it the kind of life I want my son to live? That was the biggest thing I asked myself. And it prompted me to make a lot of changes. And 99 years old, 85, 90, I know none of the money in this world is going to matter. You could have millions of dollars. One thing I learned from my father is all the money in the world, you are still going to die and we're going to get buried in the same ground that everybody else is.
Right.
But the one thing that would make me the most proud and most happy is that my son can be basically, how would I put the way I talk about my father, the way he made an impact that I can make half of that impact in his life. And he can be like, I am the man today, and he doesn't look back at me and be like, oh, oh, my father sucks at this. But he looks back and he goes, man, I had because he doesn't have the privilege of meeting his grandfather, right? So through him, to me, I wanted him to know that he had a great grandfather. So honestly, as it all boils down to my 99, when it all says come, fruition, the company's not going to matter. The podcast, I love it, but the podcast is not going to be priority. What's going to be priority to me is going to be my wife at the time. And what's also going to be a priority to me is going to be that my kids can just honestly just be like, listen, our dad was it, man. Our dad was it.
Hmm.
So that's it. That's all I said. I just want my kids to be proud of me. That's honestly it. And everything I'm doing is I just want to, everything I'm building is just so my son can just be like, when he sets up, becomes a man, the conversation we had January, 2022, when he said, I want to be like you. And I'm like, all right, son, let's do it. That's it.
Yes, sir. Powerful stuff. So, Emmanuel, how can people connect with you? What are your social media handles and website?
Everything is pretty. If you want to, you can find me on TikTok, you can find me on Twitter, but honestly I'd say Instagram. If you want to get a response from me, would be on Instagram, because Instagram I monitor it. But it's at the real Igweh. So at TheRealIgweh. You can connect me on any account. It's pretty much at the real Igweh. Same thing, you can type the real Igweh on YouTube as well. Or you can type the Evolution Podcast to be able to find me and check out the stuff we talk about. We put out content talking about business, talking about finances, and also talking about just how to become a better individual and just overall not be a bad person to society, basically.
Okay, yes, sir. And of course, I'll put all the information in the description of the episode. Hey, Emmanuel, thanks again for the conversation, man. I really appreciate you.
Doug, it was an absolute pleasure being on here. And I know you were saying that, you usually ask about, Montgomery, and now you're expanding. And I would say this. I think I've been to Montgomery. I've been to Montgomery. I've been to Alabama. I've been to the Mississippi area. I've been to all that parts of town. And I'll say this, man. I've met the most awesome people, hospitable people in the It's something, and I'd say this, man, the best barbecue hands down is in Alabama. It's. I know someone's gonna be like take offense to that, but I'm saying this: the best barbecue I ever had was in Alabama, and the one barbecue that got me sick was also in Alabama. So I would say that, man. Like, it was good having you on. Thank you. It's good
Yes,
me
sir.
being on. Yeah.
Oh, yes, sir. No problem. Good people, that concludes another dope episode of the Gumptown Podcast. In the meantime, in between time, y'all know what to do. Be blessed, be safe, but most importantly, have the audacity to be you. Go. Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate your time and your attention. Until next time.